What is up, guys? I'm Kyle at Fortune. In this video, we're building some rear leaf springs to put up front in the Samurai. Oh! So nowadays, the cool way to stretch and lift your Samurai and get a better ride out of it is go with bigger springs, wider springs like the YJ leaf springs. A lot of guys sell kits for those. A lot of people are running those because they ride better, they flex better, and you can get a little bit of wheelbase out of it, which is really great to get that tire out of your firewall, especially up front where it's getting really close to that sheet metal. Pterodactyls. One of the more old school ways to do it was to run Samurai rear springs up front. Because they are longer, they give you a little bit more wheelbase, and because they're longer, they flex better, they ride better. It's kind of the same thing, it's just a different setup. It's a free upgrade for us. You'll see why here in a second, and that's why we're going to try it in this video. Alright, so here is a stock Samurai front spring. So these are 2 inches wide, and let's see how long this thing is. So trying to go with the curve on this main leaf, looks like it's about 37 inches. So 37 inches is incredibly short. I'm sure there's some out there, but off the top of my head, I can't think of any leaf spring in the front of a vehicle that is shorter than that. It's kind of ridiculous actually how short that is, and that's the reason why everybody wants to swap these out with other springs. The length relative to the width, this spring just does not have enough length to really get a good amount of flex out of it. Flex as in articulation. Like, we want to keep those tires on the ground as much as possible so they're actually pulling or pushing us whatever we need it to do, instead of just hanging out in the air. And these springs just do not flex enough. They don't allow for enough movement because of their short length to actually get that flex. So this spring is pretty flexible. I mean, most springs you can't bend with your hands, but this one you actually can. It just shows you how soft it is. But we need a spring that is longer, and one of the cool things about Samurais is that their rear spring is a little bit longer, so hopefully we can get some more flex out of that. So let's compare this 37-inch spring to a rear Samurai spring and look at the difference. All right, so here is a rear Samurai spring. Look how long this one is. Once again, measuring the main leaf. So this one's about 40 inches. So this one was about 37 for the front and about 40 inches for the rear. So 3 inches longer. That doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're coming from a spring this small, that actually is a lot. Once again, I mean, I can make this thing flex just by pushing down on it, which shows you how soft it is. So that would be perfect for the front of the Samurai. Now, one of the huge advantages of running this spring up front, besides the length, which is going to give you more flex, is you can see that because of the length and the centered pin, you can actually get a little bit of a wheelbase stretch if you mount them both in the stock spring hanger. So try to compare these. All right, so going from spring eye to the center pin on a stock front spring is about 18.5 inches, somewhere around there. On the stock rear spring, we're looking at about 19.75, maybe 20 inches. Hard to get an accurate measurement off of this, but if we're going from 18 to 19.5, that just shows you right there, that's going to get you about 1.5 inches of forward stretch. Now that we've got these two springs side by side too, and they're sitting like this, you can see how much bigger this spring is. So running these springs, yes, they're going to flatten out when we put them on there, but these usually do net you a little bit more lift, and you can see it right there. So let's look at the differences in the leaves here. In the stock front leaf spring, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 leaves. They're all just regular suspension leaves. And then if you look at the rear, it's got 1, 2, 3, and then an overload leaf on the bottom, and this one's much thicker. This is a pretty strong one. If we take this leaf off, we're only going to be left with 3 because it's longer, it's more flexible. There just isn't going to be enough strength in this to last. It's going to be too soft and be bouncy. Going to get some spring wrap maybe. So what we're going to do, take these leaf springs apart, and we're going to combine them and make them into one strong, long rear spring. And before we do that, we're going to have to fix a couple things. Somebody painted these leaf springs blue. God knows why. I've got to go through and get a lot of that off. Looks like most of it's going to come off anyways, but there's some rust. We're just going to try to clean these up, and then we're going to build our leaf springs. We're going to put some new bushings in it. Then hopefully soon in an upcoming video, we'll be able to install these on the Samurai and look at how much stretch we're going to get and also how much lift. Really looking forward to that. All right, let's get started by tearing these springs apart. All right, so this is where we're at now with the big rear leaf. The only one that we took out was this big overload one. We can just discard this. This is the stock front leaf right here. You notice I didn't take the bushings or anything out of this one because we're not going to reuse this, so there's no use putting any extra work into it. These top two leaves, the longest ones, we can discard those as well. When you're building your rears up front spring packs, you basically get to decide which leaves you want to put in there. You can use a combination of those other longer ones if you want, but the way that a lot of our predecessors have done this is keeping these stock 3 leaves without the overload from the rear, and then taking either the bottom or the 2 bottom leaves from the front pack. So if you have a very lightweight Samurai, you don't have a winch up front, not an aftermarket bumper, you know, a motor swap, anything like that, if you're way lighter up front, then this is probably what you should do. Throw just the bottom leaf from the front pack on there and then get your pin back, and you can see you've got enough room left on there to put the nut back on and run these springs like that. For me, I'm running a 1/4 inch full width bumper, and then I have a worn winch on the front. So between the two of those, I have a bunch of additional weight, and I'd rather have some heavier duty springs than have the more flex. I think I'm going to get the flex out of it anyways just because of the weight. So if you want some heavier springs, you can put the bottom 2 like this, grab your pin, line up all the holes. And then the issue we have now is that there aren't a lot of threads left on there. So we'll see if we're able to get that going. I can just put it in the vise or a clamp and see if we can get them threaded on. We might be able to. It's pretty close. Those 5 leaves on there now is pretty heavy duty spring, and that's probably also going to net us a little bit more lift. So we'll just have to check that out when we get to that point. But for now, this is what we're going to go with in ours. When you're cleaning these springs off, I know a lot of people like to take them to get sandblasted, or they'll take them down to bare metal with a flap wheel or something. To me, that's just a little bit too much work for what you're getting out of it. These are just a bunch of old used springs, so I'm not that concerned with them. Really, I just want to clean them off to get any rust, any of the old paint, make sure there's no cracks, make sure there's no bends. If there are cracks and bends, there's not really a way to fix it. I would just scrap it. I know some people say it's fine to weld up a crack on a leaf spring. For me, it's not. So I would just replace it personally. We've got 1 coat of this Rust-Oleum self-etching primer on the springs on both sides, and you can see it's a little bit patchy. Not a huge deal to get all the leaves in between. As long as there's no bare metal showing, we know it's not going to rust. But now that we've got primer on all these leaves that are going to be sandwiched in between, we're going to assemble these. Then we're going to paint it with our final color, which is Rust-Oleum semi-gloss black. And then at that point, we'll move on to the next step of putting our new bushings in there. We have the springs primered and painted. Once again, we use some Rust-Oleum semi-gloss black, my go-to. I love using spray paint on this stuff because these are gonna get all chipped up, and you can see there's like a texture on here from all the different colors it's been painted over the years, and the paint's gonna come off. I put 2 heavy coats of this on there, but it's cool because this stuff's cheap, and I can just spray it and touch it up, and the axle and differential, all that stuff is the same color, so it's not a big deal, easy to touch up. So what we've got to do next is throw those bushings in here, and then these springs should be ready to go. These are the bushings that we're gonna be using from Energy Suspension. If you remember when I was rebuilding the Samurai front springs, well, rebuilding them, we were basically just putting new bushings in them. These are the same ones. These kits are cool because they come with the lube already in them, so you can help get them in there. There's a ton of different ways to put these in there, but the way that I find is the easiest is to press them in using not a press, but a vise. So that's what I'm gonna do again. And you can see there's some bigger ones and some little ones. The springs have a big end on one side and a little end on the other, so it's pretty easy to put them in. One thing to acknowledge with this though is if you're using the stock shackle with these, or whether it's in the rear or the front, you can use your old metal sleeve that goes inside the bushing. But if you're gonna upgrade and use these, it actually is a different size bolt, which means you're gonna have to use a bigger bolt, and you're gonna have to drill out your hangers. So keep that in mind if you're gonna make this upgrade. Keep meaning to build a vise stand, but it's like so nice to have this thing mobile. I think what I'm gonna do is just get another one that's bigger, or maybe a smaller rather, and leave that on here, and then the bigger one build a big setup for, because I like having this one up here. remember this from last time. The bushing in here is a little bit too wide. It only needs to be about as wide as the spring, and it's actually a lot wider, so I'm gonna have to make some cuts. Forgot about that from last time. All right, we've got our new rear springs ready to go up front. 5 leaves of goodness. All right, so we've got our new bushings put in there. We've got them painted, all stacked up. Now the only thing left to do is get the Samurai ready for these springs. So that's going to be in another video because I'm still kind of working out how I'm going to do that part. This was really easy to do, and you can see I've got a bunch of discarded parts of springs over there. So, you know, it doesn't take a lot of work or a lot of skill to do this. Anybody could do this. So it's really cool to be able to build your own spring packs like this and have them come out so nice like this. So you saw me cutting those metal inserts that go inside the bushings. I think the reason for that is because the rubber on these bigger ends is just a little bit bigger than the rubber over here. So these sides are about 2.5 inches wide, and then I think this one was like 2 3/8. So I just made the bushing on the skinny end just slightly wider than the spring, and then on this end it can use the whole thing. So super easy. Excited about this mod. So like I said, guys, we are all done, and this is a really cool mod to do. And the reason why I think so is because if you're on a budget like me, it's a way you can mess around with different suspension setups without buying lift kits or without buying lift springs or anything like that. You can just mess around with the springs you've already got. So for me, my plan originally was to go rears all around, try that out, and then I'll try rears up front and YJs in the back. So YJ stock springs would be cool because that would free up your rear springs, so you could build your rear springs into front spring packs like I'm doing. So really all you have to do is buy some YJ springs, and then you've got a new set of springs up front just waiting for you to build them. If you don't want to do that, you can do what I did. Just find some rear springs that somebody else isn't using. They're pretty easy to find, I think, mostly because other people are swapping out to Toyota leaf springs or YJ leaf springs, something like that. But very cool option. So like I said, that's going to be another video when we install these in the Samurai, because it takes a little bit of work because we're moving that wheelbase out a little bit. So we're going to have to address that with our different shock mounting. Might have to change up our drive shafts. I'm pretty sure we're going to need to just get our drive shaft extended, which isn't a big deal, and that's the right way to do it. I don't want to run a spacer anymore. Yeah, and there's a shackle stop that the springs sit on, or the shackle sits on, and make sure it doesn't go up anymore. That's the part I'm really trying to figure out right now, so that's kind of what's holding me up, but it should be here in no time. Really looking forward to this. So guys, thanks for checking out this video. Super easy mod. If you've got any tips or any questions about it, put it down in the comments and let me know. If you're interested in seeing any of these products that we use, check out the description. I'll put some links down there for you guys to check those out. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.